Now we have the pleasure to meet Lyle Cubberly, who's joined us at the library today to talk about his years of service. And so, Lyle, what branch of the service were you in?
I was in the Air Force, United States Air Force.
Oh my goodness! When did you enlist?
Oh yes.
When did you enlist?
Right out of high school.
Right out of high school.
So I graduated from high school, I think, on June 6th and enlisted on July the 5th.
Beautiful. And where did you grow up?
Southeastern Michigan.
Okay.
It's a little town called Milan, which is just south of Ann Arbor.
Oh, okay.
So big University of Michigan
My
fan.
daughter lived in Ann Arbor
Oh,
for
is that
a
right?
while. Loved it. Loved
nice
it.
town, isn't it?
Zingerman's Deli was the.
Oh.
It was great. And the farmers were. It's a wonderful place to live.
Yes.
All right. So you were in Michigan, and where did they send you for basic training and so forth?
All Air Force goes to Lackland Air Force Base
Okay.
down in San Antonio,
Oh,
Texas.
okay. And was that the first time you'd been to Texas?
Oh, yeah, first time I've been anywhere.
Oh,
really,
okay. What was it like?
Well, we flew down, and I remember my parents took me to Ann Arbor, and I got on the bus on the 4th of July, and then took us into Detroit, and the induction center was Fort Wayne.
Okay.
Named for Mad Anthony Wayne.
Wayne. Oh my goodness.
It's Wayne County there, and it's on the south side. And then we spent the night, and then in processed all that day. And then late in the day, we raised our right hands and do solemnly swear, and uphold and defend the Constitution, etc. And then put us on a plane and send us to San Antonio, Texas. And then I remember it was
hot.
Well, it's July, yeah. And they got us off the bus, and we got onto a blue Air Force bus. Air Force buses are blue, and the guy was pretty nice. Come on, guys. And there was a bunch of us from Michigan, in fact, we had a flight of 65 people. Okay. All right, in the Air Force they called them flights, and all of us from Michigan, I remember. And but soon as we got there, we met our TI, our training instructor, and he called us every name under the book. I grew up in a blue collar household, and I knew a lot of the words he were using, but I'd never heard them that quick and that many right after the other, and hollering and screaming and get in line and, and then the Air Force, the first thing you do, no matter what time of day you get there, they feed you.
Oh, okay.
The first thing they do is they feed you. So we're going to go over here, going to get something to eat, and then, like I say, it was maybe 6 o'clock in the evening, and they took us in. We got our stuff and went to a barracks, and this is the old World War II barracks that we were in.
All right, yeah.
And
wow.
And they were so old. We had bunk beds downstairs, but upstairs we only had single bunks because the floors were not strong enough.
Whoa.
And in those days, what they did is they had sister flights. So 3 flights would go together, all the way through, and we were the first flight.
Okay.
And so we had to wait for the other 2 flights to get there, and it took 3, 4, 5 days for those other 2 flights to assemble. So we were walking around in our civilian clothes.
Oh, really?
And in those, we were called rainbows because we were all. A uniform is called that because you're all uniform. Right. You're all in the greens. And so we were rainbows, but we were marching. Marching everywhere. So we got to spend a little extra time. But
getting acclimated.
Yeah.
Did you always want to fly?
Yes. I can remember as a kid that having dreams of being able to fly. On my own. Just up there soaring and I think in a prior life, I was a hawk.
Okay.
Because I know what it feels like, you're soaring, and then to fold your wings in, and then to dive on a prey, and it's there.
Beautiful.
The mental image.
Beautiful.
Yes.
All right, now what years did you serve?
1963 to 1990.
Wow, so
27
it
years.
Was your career.
Yeah.
And where did your Air Force experience take you?
Oh, well, I can name them in a row. I mean,
all right, yeah.
from from Lackland, we went to Chanute Air Force Base in Illinois, and that's a technical training area,
Okay.
you know. And the Air Force did that, you know. In other words, it's even though your flight, you know, went through basic training, then you scattered all over the place to go to your tech school, you know. And they give you a battery of tests to
Right.
find out what you're good at, you know.
Yeah.
And it's
And what was your specialty?
at that time it was I was a missile systems analyst, and I worked on the old Hound Dog missile. It's no longer in the inventory, and it went underneath the wings of the B-52.
Okay.
And and then from there I went to Beale Air Force Base in Northern California, Marysville, Yuba City area, 50 miles north of Sacramento.
Oh, wow.
And I worked on B-52s and this Hound Dog missile. And the neat thing about that, after I was there for a while, a couple of years, I got to fly on the B-52s about once or twice a month, and that was quite an experience. Let me
Talk
tell you,
about iconic aircraft. I mean, the B-52
it's
is
still there. I mean, grandsons are flying it. You know,
Oh.
the fathers and granddads used to fly in. You know,
Wow.
and it's the closest I ever come to getting airsick was on a B-52. I remember we were, you know, what they used to do is practice low level B-52s. When I say low level, treetop level,
Whoa.
50, 100 feet off the ground, you know, and just following the terrain, you know, so that they try to, because that's where all the clutter's at, you know. So for radar, you know, you flew down there, and we were flying over Arizona in the summertime, and in the middle of the day, and that's hot, and I don't know what thermals are at, you know. It's the sun comes down, heats up, and then the air rises, you know, and it doesn't rise uniformly, you know. It could be hotter here, cooler there, so you hit a place and you're going up and you're going down, and you're following the terrain. And at the time I was sitting downstairs, it's a B-52 had at that time a crew of 6. A pilot and a co-pilot were up front, and then behind them, facing the back, was the electronic warfare officer. So he was the defensive guy, you know, flares, chaff, things like that, jamming. And also they had an enlisted guy who manned the guns in the tail of the B-52.
Okay.
You know, they had 4 50 caliber machine guns back there. And then downstairs, facing forward, were the bombardier and the navigator.
Wow.
And then right behind them was the hatch that went down that you got out of.
Okay.
You know, and then when you put the hatch down, there was a little seat, and the little seat was maybe about that wide, but I had a pack or a parachute on that was about that wide, so I was sitting on a seat about that wide, you know, and you're sitting there, you're buckled in, I got my helmet on, I got my oxygen, and you were just sitting there, and you're just going like this. I don't know for how long. I think it was days. It seemed like days anyway. And I ended up. I remember the bombardier said, "Bombs away," and oh, jeez, it's over. The only thing that saved me, got my oxygen mask on, and I'm on 100% oxygen, and it's geez. And then all of a sudden, the gunner shouts out, "Simulated bogey at 6 o'clock, take evasive action."
Oh.
And I think this is what the pilot lived for, because that plane, B-52 is a big aircraft, you know, huge. And this thing was up and down and slipping and sliding and things like that. I thought, oh, God, here we go again. You know? But you know, looking back at it, it was a great experience. I wouldn't have traded it for the world, you know. And
It just seems like that aircraft was so agile. I mean, it defied logic that something so big could be
like a bumblebee.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Exactly. You know, it's got those. You know, it's got those 8 engines on it, and and in the old days with the Hound Dogs on it, they're jet engines also. So when they were taken off, they would put on those. So not only did they have the 8 engines, but they had 2 more to help them take off.
Lift.
Yeah. And then from there, they were starting to phase out the the Hound Dog missiles, so I cross-trained again. I went to Keesler Air Force Base down in Mississippi and became a computer repairman.
Okay.
And then from there, I went up to Westover there in Chicopee.
Yeah.
That's where I met my wife.
Oh,
and
good.
At the Little Methodist Church there, and we got married. In fact, our anniversary is coming up here next week, Tuesday, the 1st of November.
Oh, wonderful.
In '69, so it'll be 47 years.
Yeah.
And then from there, I went to. That was when 8th Air Force headquarters was at Westover,
Yeah.
and they shut that down. And that now it's just a reserve base now.
Yeah.
And then we went to Fuchu Air Station in Japan, right there, Tokyo.
Wow.
And I was lucky because initially I had orders to go to Vietnam
Yeah.
as a computer repairman, but then they looked at my security clearance, and I had a high security clearance. They said, no, we got someplace else. So there at Fuchu, I worked at a Defense Intelligence Agency computer switch, and all the intelligence for the Far East was funneled into this and then shipped back to Maryland. And the reason I had to have a high security clearance, not only did they have the intelligence,
Yeah.
whatever,
From the
it's
field, yeah.
that the Russians are starting, going to have some exercises in the Far East, but they had the source.
Oh.
The source, so it said the Russians got to have intelligence, and the source is, the janitor in the Russian embassy, so that's why you needed a high security clearance. It's you weren't, if you didn't show up for work, you weren't AWOL, you were an automatic deserter.
Wow.
So that's a step up, and I remember one time I had roads in Japan are narrow, and if you can imagine this, they had no law of eminent domain in Japan. So they had a road. So everything went in the road. First of all, you had the road, then you had the open sewers, that we call the benjo ditches, and then you had the telephone poles, and then you had the people, then you had the bicycles. And so it just got narrower and narrower and narrower.
Wow.
And I remember I was coming down here, and I was on my way to work, and I turned a corner, and here is the biggest dump truck in the world. Boom! And I said, geez, everybody's okay. I got a bent fender, and I was able to kick it out, and geez, I'm going to be late. So I'm looking around, and I see a Japanese business over there. So I went in there, and I knew a little Japanese. Hey, I got to use your telephone.
Yeah.
And sure, And so I called my work, and I said, listen, I had a little accident. I'm trying to. My car's all right, but I got a. Fender's rubbing against the tire, and as soon as I get it straightened out, I'll be there.
Don't worry about it.
That's right. I don't send the police after me. I'm on my way. And but we were there for 3 years. And typically, you got cameras and you get stereo and stuff like that. Plus, we got a daughter.
That's so good.
Our daughter was born in Tokyo.
Very good.
And just. Laura takes after her father so much. She has tattooed on her right ankle. It's in Japanese, no less, made in Japan.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Isn't that one? Oh, my goodness, that's great.
And then from there we went to North Dakota.
Oh, wow.
I mean, from Kanto Plains is the most populated place in the world, and it's because 85% of Japan is mountainous, and so any place they had a flat area, people live. Tokyo, Yokohama, Yokosuka is all right there on this flat area, and then I took a break in the service and went back and finished up my college degree, and I'm trying to get my degree. When we got married, my wife Barbara had her degree, and she was an accountant, and I didn't. So I had a little bit of incentive.
Gotta do this here.
Yeah. So I went back to Michigan, and in a year's time, I was able to finish 2 years of college, and then I came back into the service again in the computer field, and went to Loring Air Force Base up northern Maine. 3 miles from the Canadian border.
Wow.
And then our son Ben was born up there, and then I cross-trained again, and this time into the weather career field. And then I went to back to Chanute and became a weather observer, and then went to Barksdale Air Force Base, Louisiana, and then and it was really something. Around any Air Force base, they have a certain amount of on-base housing.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't qualify, so I'm looking for a place. You can't find a place to rent, so we had some money saved. Okay, we'll buy a house, all right? But then looking and looking, couldn't find anything in our budget. And I remember this one, finally the realtor took us into a house, and Laura's 3, and she's looking at it. She walks in, she says, Daddy, I like this one. Just buy it. And we ended up, we bought it. We bought it. But the morning I signed for the house, the commander called me into his office and told me, you have orders to move. So we got there in April and left in December.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and it's back to Chanute again, and this time to be a forecaster, a weather forecaster.
Wow.
And then from there, I went to Omaha, Nebraska, Offutt Air Force Base at SAC headquarters. The Air Weather Service has a big computer hub there,
Okay.
and where they generate a lot of computer maps. And so I got there in September, and then the following September, I applied for and was accepted to go to Officers Training School,
And where
OTS,
Okay.
and that's back down at San Antonio, Texas,
Okay.
right next to Lackland Air Force Base, a place called Medina Annex, and that's where the Air Force trains their officers. And so I graduated in December of '78 there, and at second in my class of 250. A little side story: the guy who beat me out just by slimmest of margins became a finance officer, and he spent time at Leavenworth in Kansas for embezzling funds.
No.
So mentally, I tell myself, I'm really the number one guy. Yeah. And then from there, I went to Michigan. To Wurtsmith Air Force Base. It's you can always tell somebody from Michigan because this is a map of Michigan.
Yeah,
Right here. So Wurtsmith is right there, right on Lake Huron, and it's spent a couple of years there, and then back to Offutt, and it was really something. It's when I was an enlisted guy there, I had a Tech Sergeant Russell that was my NCOIC, non-commissioned officer in charge, but when I came back as a lieutenant, I was his boss. That usually doesn't happen, but Sergeant Russell and I, that wasn't a problem. He treated me nice, and I treated him nice. And then from there, I went back to Loring as the weather commander of the weather unit up there, and I was the at the time, I don't know if I was the youngest weather commander because I was a brand new captain. I had just put on captain in December, and then I got there in June, so 7 months as a captain, and it's usually a major lieutenant colonel slot, and which is but I was an enlisted guy for almost 14 years, so the Air Weather Service commander knew all of this, and I said, "No, Lyle, you can do it," and I did. It was all right. And then from there, I went to Scott Air Force Base in Illinois, right outside of St. Louis, 20 miles from downtown St. Louis. And worked at this was headquarters Air Weather Service, and did a few different jobs. One of the jobs I was in was acquisition, and we were bringing online a new computer system, which the Air Force is still using to forecast with. But the last year I was there from 85 through 88. That last year, 88, of 365 days, I think I was gone like 280 days.
Wow.
I was, what they call TDY, temporary duty.
Okay.
And all over the place. Getting this computer system online, testing it.
Sounds like real long days.
They were
frustrating.
Yeah, well, no, they weren't. When you look back, it was long, tiring. I missed my family. All that kind of stuff. But the places I went to, we went to Vancouver, Columbia, British Columbia.
That's beautiful. Yeah.
It's the nicest town in the world. Yeah. Because there were a few of us there doing testing, maybe 15 of us at one time, and we were out eating dinner one time just before Christmas. I remember that. And hey, how does Vancouver rank with other cities that and people been to Germany, stationed there, England, all over the world, and we all came to the conclusion that Vancouver is the nicest town in the world, and it's gorgeous. It really is. They got Stanley Park there, a virgin forest right downtown, and it's named for the guy who, Stanley Cup in hockey.
And
it's Sunset Beach, and if you love salmon, and I love salmon.
Yeah, I love salmon too.
It's nice. And then from there, I was picked to be a commander again. This time at Ellsworth Air Force Base in South Dakota near Rapid City. And I was supposed to go to Hill Air Force Base in Utah, just north of Salt Lake City, but the weather commander got fired. In fact, the last two weather commanders got fired, and the Air Weather Service commander, General Chapman, came in or he called me to his office and says, Lyle, I need a favor. And I says, yes, sir, I'll do it. He says, don't you want to hear what it is? And I says, no, sir, anything you give me I know is good for me. And he says, well, and then he tells me, it's a unforecast thunderstorm. And Ellsworth had the B-1 bomber, just brand new into the inventory, and it can't take hail damage. And an unforecast hailstorm, you got all this $1 billion worth of aircraft out there, getting hailed on, and so he was gone. So I says, I'll go right now. And he says, no, when are the kids getting out of school? And I says, the end of May. And he says, okay, if they get out the 26th, I want you to be there on the 27th. And I said, yes, sir, I'll do that. And so at that, I had a few months. I had about 4 months. So I made myself an expert on high plains thunderstorms. And then when I got there, I called my officers and senior NCOs together, gave them the course, at what I had learned. Yeah. And I said, all right, now pass it down to the troops. And in the 2 years I was there, we never had an unforecast thunderstorm. So we did good, I guess. And it had a great bunch of guys working for me.
I am so impressed, Lyle, with the amount of training and learning that your career afforded you. I mean, really, you had remarkable opportunity.
Oh, I did, yes, and then
and took advantage of it.
Oh, yes, and then my GI Bill, I ended up taking advantage of that too. It's when you sign up for the GI Bill, to go to college. I remember the one guy who saved my life. He says there's a block there. It says, what is the highest level that you want to attain? And I says, I don't know, a master's degree. And he said, no, put PhD. So I did, and I ended up with a PhD.
That's wonderful.
And over the course, going night school, working on. I ended up with 2 bachelors, 2 masters, and a PhD, and I think it's just ingrained into me. Like you say, the Air Force, you're always learning, you're always going to school, and I'd look around and I'd get bored, And my wife can tell me, she reads me like a book. She says, all right, Lyle, what are you going to do now? And I says, well, I'm thinking about going back to school and getting another master's or whatever, and so I ended up with those 5 degrees. So
That's
it's
wonderful. Now, when you eventually retired, where did you go, and what brought you to this area of the country?
Okay, there's a couple different questions there. Okay, so I retired in '90.
Yeah, okay.
And then I went to work for a company that in St. Louis that manufactured, installed, and serviced weather equipment.
Oh.
Okay, and it right up my line.
Yeah.
So I got there and I was hired to be their liaison with the military, and then I wasn't there 4 months, 5 months maybe, and remember the president called me and says, Lyle, we really need help in the service department, and we need help in the technical department, R&D, and I says, well, what do you want me, and he says, well, I want you to run both of them.
There you go. All right.
Well, I eventually did it. Of course, we negotiated salary. I says, listen, I'm going to need, I'm filling 2 slots here. We're going to
make it worth my while.
That's right. We're going to bump this salary up a few notches, aren't we? It wasn't quite double, but it was okay, And but then I was there for about 1.5 years, and I'm getting antsy again, and that's when I went back to school full time. And got my second master's degree in geography because I wanted to teach. And I ended up teaching, not full time, but I did, as an adjunct professor. Both at Southern Illinois University at Edwardsville and at Southwestern Illinois College, community college there in the area. So, but in the meantime, what I did, I got into social work, and I ended up as a drug alcohol counselor.
Wonderful.
And I did it in mainly middle schools. And my job, for the majority of the time, was to work with kids in schools. I didn't work for the school system. I worked for a company that offered our services to these poor school systems, and we get paid with state and federal grants. And and my one job as a early interventionist, these middle school kids going along fine, and all of a sudden they'd like fall off the end of a table. Grades went, down the tubes. Attitude went down. I mean, they're teenagers. I mean, that happens to all of them. But ended up, so winning their confidence, finding out what's going on in their lives, and then getting them help where they needed it. And then, like anything else, the money dried up on that. So I ended up working in a residential facility for teenage boys, 12 to 18 years old, and worked with those kids. And then in 90, Barbara and I, 90s when I retired from the Air Force. In 09, Barbara and I retired completely. And Barbara's from Western Mass, and our daughter Laura was living here in Clinton.
Oh, great! Okay.
And she got married, and her husband Craig just had our first grandchild, Cameron. And Laura needed help. She didn't have anybody here that she could rely on. Call up and say, hey, can you, like we got to go to work and Cameron's sick, and so we came here, we bought, and Connecticut's a lovely state.
It is.
But when you move here, and then we bought a house here, and we got half the house for twice the money from the St. Louis area, and it's so expensive. So Laura's got two boys now, Cameron and Nathan, 10 and soon to be 10 and soon to be 7, and so we're full-time grandparents.
Oh,
so
that's so wonderful.
So we get the boys off the bus, take them to soccer or basketball or taekwondo or golf or whatever, and so we stay busy that way, and we're very busy in the Methodist Church here.
Great.
And then I became I always got to do something, So I took the courses and became a lay minister in the Methodist Church, and I go down here to Peregrine Landing, or the shoreline at Clinton now, and give them weekly services. And then when the minister's gone, I give the services there, and we stay busy. I'm big in the veterans, at the American Legion, and I'm part of the honor guard. That any time that a Connecticut veteran dies and is buried, if they want to, they can request an honor guard to fire a salute, and then that's what we do. We do it a lot at Middletown, up at the State Veterans Cemetery. And then, so we dress in our uniforms. It still fits. It's a little tight, but it still fits. And it's not a half a uniform; it's a full uniform. And there's about 9 of us that do that. So 3 of us go up at a time. In fact, I got a call this morning about 8 o'clock, and the guy Lyle, we just got a phone call. We got a mission, and I said, Wally, I'm sorry, I can't help you. And it's because we had this to do, and then also. Found out that talking with the guys, I'm the chaplain for the American Legion post down here, 66, and one of the guys says, "Lyle, did you know that the police chaplain retired about a year ago, and we got nobody there?" Make a long story short, I am now the police chaplain.
Great.
And it's probably will soon pick up the fire department too. So it's. So stay busy. Stay busy.
Wonderful. How do you feel when people thank you for your service?
Well, I tell them thank you very much. It's nice to be recognized and honored that way, and because during the Vietnam